Hey there, Amicus listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI. And stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Hi, and welcome to Amicus. This is Slate's podcast about the courts and the law. I'm Andrea Bernstein. I'm sliding into Dahlia's chair for a few weeks while she takes a well-deserved break. I've covered 5 trials against Trump or his company for NPR, and I'm the author of American Oligarchs, the Kushners, the Trumps, and the Marriage of Money and Power. I've hosted 3 podcasts that touch on Trump and the law, and now I'm here to host a summer series we're calling The Law According to Trump. As we all know, Donald Trump has spent a lot of time in court in the past few years defending himself against 4 felony indictments. Beginning in 2022, his company was convicted of 17 felony fraud counts for paying his employees unlawfully with untaxed benefits like luxury cars and apartments. He himself was found liable for defamation and sex abuse and ordered to pay writer E. Jean Carroll $5 million. He was then found liable for another instance of defamation and ordered to pay $83 million. Not a month later, he was found liable by a New York judge for a decades-long business model of fraud and ordered to pay, when you count interest, nearly $500 million. And then I covered the most watched trial of them all, the one where the jury foreman said guilty 34 times to the charge of falsifying business records in the first degree. And Trump is still facing charges in Washington, D.C. and in Georgia for allegedly trying to illegally alter the outcome of the 2020 election. But in this series, we're going to look at something else, at Donald Trump's long relationship with the law, how he's used lawyers and lawsuits and sometimes even judges to enhance his brand, his money, and his power. And we're going to trace the arc of how he's done this, from way back when he was first starting out in the real estate business to, well, right now, even when he's defending himself against criminal cases and civil lawsuits. As a business person, Trump had a habit of taking other people to court, some 3,500 times, according to today's guest, at least 3,500 times. Cases against business associates, journalists, suits in response to other people's suits. This week on Amicus, why does more equal better when it comes to litigation in Trump world? We're going to speak to Jim Zirin, a former assistant U.S. attorney in Manhattan and author of Plaintiff-in-Chief, a portrait of Donald Trump in 3,500 lawsuits. But first, I want to talk to Slate's own Law of Trump correspondent, Jeremy Stahl, my Lower Manhattan courthouse line buddy and fellow witness to legal history. We're going to speak about Trump's post-presidential litigation spree. Hey, Jeremy, it is so great to talk to you again.
It's really good seeing you, Andrea.
So we have been watching the various criminal cases against Donald Trump flame out or sputter. The Supreme Court's immunity ruling looms both over the D.C. January 6th case about Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election, and even resulted in a delay in the sentencing in the hush money case in Manhattan. In Florida, Judge Eileen Cannon, running on what Dahlia has called doctrinal vapors, tossed the stolen classified documents case. But beyond these criminal suits, listeners would be forgiven for forgetting about a whole slew of suits Trump himself has filed in the years since January 2021, when he reluctantly left the White House. So it's kind of like that's a low hum in the background. Let's bring it up to the foreground. The former president often claims that he is being harassed and persecuted by lawfare, but he is an active litigant himself. So I'm hoping you can kind of give listeners a rundown of who he sued in the last couple of years or so.
Jim will get into this a lot more, I'm sure, but this is obviously a historic pattern of former President Donald Trump, who for years, for decades, has used the courts as a weapon and has been party to thousands of lawsuits and has initiated a great number of those. So since 2021, since he left the Oval Office, he's sued Hillary Clinton. He's sued Tish James, the Attorney General of New York, who charged him in a civil fraud case in that state. He sued a number of media figures beyond the New York Times. He sued George Stephanopoulos of ABC News. He sued his niece, Mary Trump. He has sued the co-founders of his Truth social media website, who were former Apprentice contestants. He sued CNN for a nearly $500 million attempted lawsuit. Many of these lawsuits have already failed and resulted in sanctions directly against Trump and even against his attorneys at times. But the point is that he has continued this pattern, this habit and this history well into his post-presidency of using civil litigation as a weapon.
That word weapon is interesting. And, partially my reaction when I hear about these lawsuits, and let's take the one against Hillary Clinton. Can you explain why he sued Hillary Clinton? It wasn't just her, it was a whole slew of people, right?
Yeah, it was, Hillary Clinton was his opponent in 2016. Hillary Clinton was involved in this overseas Steele dossier, this compilation of accusations about the former president involving Russia.
That is, she hired a law firm that hired a firm to do opposition research that hired the man who created the dossier named Chris Steele.
Some of which were proven or demonstrated to be kind of absurd, some of which were iffy, but all of which were eventually debunked in some fashion and were part of, the calculus in opening the investigation into former President Trump's ties to Russia before the 2016 election and after he was elected even. So there was this wide-ranging set of claims about harassment and efforts to torpedo his candidacy and all these things that amounted to a political manifesto. And I think that's what the judge in that case eventually called it when it was thrown out. And not only is it a weapon for trying to intimidate adversaries, it's a weapon to try to gain publicity and attention to his whole political talking points, his whole political perspective. And that's sort of what this one was and attempted to be before it, flamed out in a pretty straightforward way.
I want to read from an excerpt from the judge's ruling on that in a minute. But, when I first heard about that lawsuit, and I sort of tend to react to many of these lawsuits, it's just sort of Trump being Trump. Here he is, and he's doing something outlandish, and he's using the court system. But it has real consequences, right? When he sues all these people, Tish James and George Stephanopoulos and Mary Trump and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, for a number of those people, it's going to have continued and severe consequences. For Mary Trump in that lawsuit, his niece, he sued over this 2018 expose by the New York Times in which they sort of looked at the origins of Donald Trump's wealth and how tax schemes were used and manipulated by his family to pass that wealth along to him. And that is essentially how he started his fortune, right? He sued the New York Times for that. He also sued his niece for that because his niece came forward as the source for the information around that story. Now, for the New York Times, that case was thrown out because it was an absurd defamation claim. You can't sue for things that are true, and what the New York Times published was true. For his niece, however, there was alleged violation of contracts and agreements that the family had come to in the past. And in recent months, actually, the judge, even though this litigation was started a long time ago, has said that case can go forward. So there are ongoing effects directly for people involved in these lawsuits. They're not always just for show. There's a second purpose, which is to try to harm and intimidate people who are perceived as enemies and people who are perceived as having attacked or attempted to hurt Trump himself.
And people who might be thinking about that, right?
Yes.
Going up against him.
Andrea, it's a perfect point to say that this is definitely meant to have a deterrent effect.
Let me read for a moment part of the judge's ruling in the Hillary Clinton case, and he ordered sanctions. And he said, "Here we are confronted with a lawsuit that should have never been filed, which was completely frivolous, both factually and legally, and which was brought in bad faith for an improper purpose. Mr. Trump is a prolific and sophisticated litigant who is repeatedly using the courts to seek revenge on political adversaries. He's the mastermind of strategic abuse of the judicial process, and he cannot be seen as a litigant blindly following the advice of a lawyer. He knew full well the impact of his actions." I should say Trump and Haba have appealed. So that's, pretty unequivocal. And yet he continues to do it again. In this case, he and his lawyer, Alina Haba, were ordered to pay nearly $1 million in sanctions. But it doesn't deter him.
Well, it's not the first time he's been chastised like this by a judge. It certainly wasn't the last, and it's happened again and again, whether it's in violating gag orders or being in potential contempt of court or filing these nuisance lawsuits, right? Not only are there financial penalties, but there are these tisk-tisks from a series of judges. And no, this does not deter him at all. This does not bother him at all. He sees this as too valuable a tool to let that affect his calculus. And, in that New York Times lawsuit with Mary Trump that I was talking about, I think he had to pay nearly $500,000 in legal fees to the New York Times for that nuisance lawsuit, right? But to Trump, the money part of this is often, it's annoying to say, but kind of like pocket change. And so the value gain and the cost benefit motivation is definitely ways in the direction of continuing to abuse these systems.
I'm wondering if you see a line between these kinds of lawsuits and the election litigation that he brought in 2020 and whatever may be on tap for 2024.
Well, there were dozens and dozens and dozens. I can't remember the final count of these lawsuits after the end of
62, maybe.
62, and I think he won a claim in maybe one of them. Or
it had to do with the distance that his observers could be from the counting. How many feet?
Right. And in many of these lawsuits, he was not repeating the spectacular claims of millions and millions of fraudulent voters that were, stealing and stashing votes against him and illegal voters and all these things. They were more technical claims. But the point was just to try to get anything before a judge who might be favorable to him. And I think, with these civil suits, there's this similar element of you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So just throw everything at the wall and hope that one thing or another sticks. And also create this massive public perception in the case of these election lawsuits that there's a there just by the fact of the number of lawsuits. Doesn't matter that they all failed. Doesn't matter that they were thrown out in almost each and every single case just directly. Just the fact that they're out there portrays a picture of two sides and a murkiness that he can then exploit in terms of his public statements.
Jeremy, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much. I believe we'll be speaking again before this series is through, and I look forward to it.
Thank you.
After the break, we talk with Jim Zirin, the author of Plaintiff in Chief. This episode is brought to you by NetSuite. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required, accessed from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies have already made the move, so do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. By popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/amicus. netsuite.com/amicus. netsuite.com/amicus.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Let's meet our expert.
Hi, I'm Ian Khan. I'm a technology futurist, speaker, and author, and I love to help organizations measure their current state of readiness for an AI-driven world. I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, our finance team is top-notch, but small. How can AI support them? Signed, Financially Drained.
Well, financially drained, a lot is happening in finance and AI, and the possibilities are endless. First of all, AI can help your finance team analyze massive amounts of financial data faster than any human or a team of people could do. Second, it can help perform functions on data through algorithms. This can connect different systems together and really simplify decision-making for your finance team. And last but not least, AI can help reduce the time needed for data to provide insights so that your leaders can make faster decisions.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
Now we are going to be talking to Jim Zirin. Jim is a former assistant U.S. attorney in Manhattan and author of Plaintiff in Chief, a portrait of Donald Trump in 3,500 lawsuits. Jim, thank you for speaking with us today.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you, Andrea.
In your book, you talk about many, many, many of these 3,500 cases. Can you tell us the one that is the most over the top, in your opinion?
Well, the one that I always come back to is the case of the two people out in Long Island that had a travel agency. It was a father and his daughter, and it was called Trump Travel. And somehow or other, Trump got wind of the fact that this small business existed. Trump had never been in the travel business, and he certainly had never done business in Long Island. I think it was in Syosset. He brought an action against them for infringement of the name Trump. Now, they used the name Trump for two reasons. One is I think they were sponsoring tours that people would take, bridge tours. And so Trump was to connote bridge. And also Trump was like Ace Hardware. It connoted excellence. In any event, he sued, and these poor people exhausted their life savings defending the suit. And the suit went on through the courts for years, and finally they settled the case on the basis that the name Trump would be in smaller type than what they had in the window. Really an absurd distinction, and that was the end of it. In any event, it was the same sort of arrogant abuse of his power as a litigant who could fund a lawsuit, and the disparity between wealthy and not so wealthy people in the courts.
Let's talk about how all of this litigiousness got started. And I should say that the 3,500 lawsuits, your book came out in 2019, right? And the lawsuits were lawsuits prior to his having become president. Do I have that right?
That's right.
So 3,500 at least.
As the American Bar Association put it at 4,000, but USA Today put it at 3,500. And so I thought I'd go with a lesser number and an abundance of caution. In any event, it was a lot.
Let's talk about how all of this got started. And your answer to that is in large part Roy Cohn. Who was he and why was he so influential on Trump?
Well, Roy Cohn first was a red baiter. He was chief counsel to Senator McCarthy. Cohn, after McCarthy was discredited, came back to New York, and he kind of lit up the town. He would be seen at all the nightclubs. He would acquire all sorts of clients, mobsters, nightclub owners, businessmen. And he eventually was indicted in the federal court. He was indicted 3 times. The first time for obstruction of justice and trying to fix a criminal case in the Southern District of New York. After 2 trials, he was acquitted. The second case, he was indicted for conspiracy to bribe a public official with the bribe money changing hands in the United States courthouse where he was standing trial on the first case. He had a lawyer named Joe Brill who cross-examined all the witnesses. Joe Brill looked like a prototype defense lawyer. His head was bald. He had a mustache and goatee, and he looked something like Chef Boyardee, and he would.
I did not know that was a prototype defense lawyer, but I'll give that to you. I'll allow it. I'll say
you'll allow it. Okay. Well, so with great effect, he in those days it was a prototype defense lawyer. So with great effect, he cross-examined all the witnesses, and then suddenly, when summations were to begin, Joe Brill complained of chest pains, and as if on cue, the EMT team came into the courtroom and carted Joe Brill out. It was like Hamlet's observation about Polonius after he stabbed him through the curtain. He said, lug the guts into the next room. So they lugged Joe Brill into the hospital. And the judge, who was Inza Wyatt, was a Southerner, came from Birmingham, Alabama, and he threw up his hands. What are we going to do? We've been here on trial for a month. Who's going to sum up? Cohn had not taken the stand. He didn't take the stand in the first 2 trials, and he didn't take the stand in this trial. And the judge allowed him to sum up in his own behalf, which had never been done before in anyone's memory. And for a day and a half, he delivered a summation without notes. And he really got his personality across to the jury as a great patriot and as a warrior against the communist threat. And he was acquitted. So here was a man who knew how to beat the system. And in 1973, he met Trump at Le Club, a nightclub for Cafe Society in New York City. He met Roy Cohn there, and he told Cohn that he and his father had been sued by the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and it was the Nixon administration then, for discrimination in housing. And the government's case was rather overwhelming because they had FBI agents who were white, maybe a man and a woman, apply for apartments at some Trump location. And they were told by the rental agent there were 10 apartments available, and he showed them the 10 apartments, and they said they'd think about it. And this would happen again and again. And then they sent a black couple, both agents, to the same place. They were told there were no apartments available and none apartments could be seen. So they had developed quite a good case. And Trump and his father went to a number of reputable lawyers in New York, and they all said, what you should do is settle the case. You'll get a slap on the wrist. You'll agree not to discriminate anymore without admitting or denying the allegations. And you can go on in business and go on with your lives. Well, Trump didn't like this advice. He liked the advice fight, which you saw was
through line
repeated
here
rather recently, and described it to Cohn, and Cohn said, of course, fight. Let's take him on.
Well, I think that is really important here, right? Is that sort of Roy Cohn had a playbook and Trump learned from it.
He had a playbook, and Trump learned from the Roy Cohn playbook. So, and all of these charges, witch hunt, which he used actually in the discrimination case, are variations on a theme. The other instrumentality he used was to go to the press, trying the case in the press, which is, of course, what he did in the criminal case in New York. He'd befriended, Cohn knew a number of columnists, and they would leak statements about the case to the media, particularly the right-wing media, and it would get published. So it was all to create a public atmosphere that was hostile to the United States, the plaintiff in the case, and favorable to Trump.
It's just so amazing to hear you say this. And, we were just speaking with Jeremy just, a few minutes ago about Trump outside of the courthouse, right? So he sets up these press availabilities and he's behind these barriers and he's in this sort of cavernous marble hallway. And he's doing all of those things. He's attacking the prosecutors. He's attacking the case. He's calling it a witch hunt. He's saying it was politically motivated. He's saying it has no merit. He's saying he's going to fight it. All of these things go back more than 50 years to the early 1970s when he meets Roy Cohn and basically adopts this wholesale, right?
That's correct. And in the New York case, he attacked the judge, even the judge's daughter, members of the prosecution staff, beside Alvin Bragg himself. They were all left-wing Trump haters, and the whole prosecution was being conducted for political purposes. And then there was the big lie that the prosecution was being directed by Joe Biden, even though it was a state prosecution, and even though the Justice Department had absolutely nothing to do with it. I mean, they did point to one former Justice Department attorney who was hired by Bragg before the Trump case was even brought. And they said, well, this shows that the fine hand of Merrick Garland was involved in the prosecution. It was just total nonsense, but people believe it.
People do believe it. And I think that is what, I think that is the thing about the Roy Cohn playbook is that it works. It's worked for Trump in many ways. There's something that I wanted to dwell on, which is that you wrote, and this was even before Trump got into office, about how he was sort of disrupting or distorting the adversarial process. And I do think that's important to dwell on because, the concept of having your day in court is ingrained in the American psyche. Like, it's all fine. You should get to go to the court. You should get the judge to rule. But I'm hearing you say it's not fine. And I'm wondering why you feel that way.
It's not fine if you misuse the process. If, Andrea, you and I have a dispute, if there were no court system, we would have no way of resolving it. We'd be at each other's throats. And the purpose of the court system is to resolve disputes in society. And so the plaintiff claims what his grievance is, his or her grievance, and the courts decide whether there's any merit to it. And the plaintiff's objective is to get a judgment in his or her favor, and the defense objective is to defeat the judgment. It's not meant to destroy the defendant or destroy the plaintiff, and it's not meant to meet some ulterior objective, either some political objective or some business objective, which has nothing to do with the case, but is really using the system as a vehicle so that Trump can make whatever case he has to his base, to his cult, and to the court of public opinion.
The sense that I have is that it's not just that it sort of is misusing the process in this case, but that each time he does this, he sort of degrades the process for everyone. I'm wondering if you see it that way.
Well, I do see it that way because that's out of the Roy Cohn playbook, too. He was drawn to Cohn, and Cohn had many drawbacks, but he was drawn to Cohn because Cohn he perceived quite rightfully as someone who could beat the system. Cohn was famous for the statement, screw the law, who's the judge? So he degraded the legal system, and Trump was in accord with that. He wanted to degrade the legal system. He didn't like the legal system. He was afraid of judges. Judges gave him trouble. So the way around it was to either figure out how you could denounce the judge or figure out how you could get the judge in the tank. And you see him doing that repeatedly throughout his career.
When we come back, more with Jim Zirin.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Want to teach your kids financial literacy, but not sure where to start? Greenlight can help. With Greenlight, parents can keep an eye on kids' spending and saving, while kids and teens use a card of their own to build money confidence. As a parent, you can send instant money transfers, set up chores, automate allowance, and more. It's a convenient way to run your household, customized to your family's needs, and the easy way to raise financially smart kids. Get started with Greenlight today and get your first month free at greenlight.com/Spotify.
We're back now with Jim Zirin, the author of Plaintiff in Chief. What I was hoping you could reflect on a little bit was, sort of the tools that Trump used in his first presidency and that he might use if he were reelected in terms of using the Justice Department, that is, using the courts to achieve his aims. Sort of what did that look like and what could it look like?
Well, you don't need my speculation about that because you have a document called Project 2025, 900 pages, in which they set forth that they will use the Justice Department to prosecute political enemies of various kinds, either those that have proved disloyal in the past. They even have a list of whom they're going to prosecute for taking political positions adverse to Trump.
So, but what I'm really interested in hearing you say as someone who sort of wrote about, the 3,500 lawsuits and Trump, use as a plaintiff is, the sort of through line between that and not just plaintiff in chief, but being commander in chief.
Well, of course, it's a play. It's a riff on commander in chief. That's in the Constitution. And as plaintiff in chief, no one in court has ever conducted himself that way. For one of the reasons is that in so many of these cases, he used campaign funds to defend himself or to prosecute a case.
It's interesting that you raised that because, one of the things I've been thinking about is, of course, when he was a private businessman, he had to actually pay for lawsuits, and yet he still filed all these lawsuits.
He didn't actually have to pay for them because particularly if a lawyer lost the suit, he would say, I don't have to pay you. Or if he won the suit, he'd say, well,
yeah, true.
It's a wonderful thing for your reputation that you represented Donald Trump and you'll get all sorts of business, so I don't have to pay you. And the lawyer, and if you sue me, then I'll charge you with malpractice. And the lawyer said, well, life's too short. It's not worth it. So he didn't pay a lot of money to lawyers. Roy Cohn said he didn't pay a lot of money to him. Roy Cohn just loved the game. He loved gaming the system. And Trump was his confederate.
One of the things that I've been reflecting on is, that immunity case, so many legal analysts and legal experts, thought about it before it got to the U.S. Supreme Court. And they were like, his claims are outlandish. He's got the whole D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and they're saying that he doesn't have immunity. And why is he going to the Supreme Court? And it's so crazy. And he kind of, reached for the brass ring there and got it, which, as I sort of thought about your book, was something that would happen in these civil suits. They seem crazy, but sometimes he would win.
That case is the paradigm example of screw the law, who's the judge? Because Nowhere in the Constitution does it give the president immunity. In all of the founders' debates about the president, they were very clear they didn't want a king who was above the law. The king can do no wrong. They wanted a president who was a servant of the law. And that is quite clear because the servant of the law, the president, takes an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So the law is supreme, not the president. But what happened was you had 6 judges, 3 of whom appointed by Trump, who were quick to say that the president is not above the law, but he is above the law. Here's where the makeshift position of Chief Justice Roberts comes into play, because he said there's a distinction between official acts and private acts. And as to private acts, we unanimously conclude the president is not above the law. So I assume if he had an affair with a woman and her jealous and her husband came to the White House and he shot the husband in the Oval Office, that's a private act. And he would not be above the law. But if he ordered Navy SEALs to do it, then it would be an official act. And he would be above the law because that's a presidential act. And so this decision is outrageous. It'll be overruled by some future court, God willing. And it's a case that really gives the president a free pass. I mean, the basic point is, which they overlooked, is that no criminal act of the president can be an official act, because if it is an official act, it affects every single American, may affect people all over the world if he commits a crime and it's thought to be an official act. And a crime can never be an official act of the president of the United States. They missed that completely.
I want to ask you one other thing. But before, I just wanted to sort of close the Roy Cohn story by saying, even though obviously Roy Cohn was Donald Trump's favorite lawyer, and he uses all of these Cohnian techniques to this day, they had a falling out at the end. Cohen was famously gay and closeted and had a boyfriend who Trump was promised to give an apartment. The boyfriend had AIDS, and Trump paid for it for a while. But then started to send bills. And Roy Cohn said, Donald Trump pisses ice water. So even Roy Cohn, at the end, got the short end of the stick from Donald Trump. So your book ends with a note of optimism. Can you read it for us?
Yes, I can. I said in the book, it's a quote from Roy Cohn's book, where he said, "No public man can indefinitely survive in the center of controversy." And this applies in spades to Donald Trump. And I think that now that there's a serious challenge to his campaign for the presidency, and he may lose, and if he does lose, I think he may be in very serious legal trouble.
Do you think that's still true? No public man can indefinitely survive in the center of controversy?
Oh, I think that's true as a matter of politics, and and I think it's going to be true of him. The media build him up, and you'll see how in the as we saw in the Roman Colosseum, suddenly the thumbs up are going to be thumbs down. The cult will break apart, and people will go on with their lives.
Jim Zirin, former assistant U.S. attorney in Manhattan and the author of Plaintiff-in-Chief, A Portrait of Donald Trump in 3,500 Lawsuits. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Amicus. Thanks so much for listening. And thank you to our Slate Plus members who support all the work we do here on Amicus and at Slate. Slate Plus members have access to dozens of exclusive episodes with Dahlia Lithwick, including unparalleled analyses of the major decisions of this past Supreme Court term with Slate's other legal heavyweight, Mark Joseph Stern, and deep dive interviews in the extraordinary How Original Is Made the Law series. If you want to check it out and you're not a Slate Plus member, you can get access by simply clicking Try Free at the top of our show page if you're listening in Apple Podcasts, or by going to slate.com/amicus plus. Thank you so much for your letters and questions. You can keep in touch at amicus@slate.com, or you can find us at facebook.com/amicuspodcast. Sarah Birmingham is Amicus's senior producer. Our producer is Patrick Fort. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio at Slate. Susan Matthews is Slate's executive editor, and Ben Richmond is our senior director of operations. I'm Andrea Bernstein, in for Dahlia Lithwick. We'll see you next week. Until then, hang in there.